we can secure the facilities, that are present in these host communities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Victor. Mr. Adeola, in your view, why do we need this legislation and why now?
Okay, so I think that apart from the things that Victor mentioned, there is the issue of administration. When you were talking about the history, you talked about how the old National Oil Company was merged with what used to be the ministry, as it were.
Correct.
To create an NPC. So invariably, you had what was a commercial organization and what was a supervisory or regulatory body merged into a company. Today, you have the NNPC, which is regulating and also competing with players in the industry.
Correct.
So the first thing, one of the benefits of PIB is that there will now be a separation between that regulatory body, which again will be now broken into two, and the commercial part of the business, which will be a limited liability company, so that it can compete with everybody else on a fair basis, on rules that are made for everybody. Because today, you essentially cannot fight an NPC. They are your boss, but they are also competing with you. So it's not fair for people who play in the industry. Secondly, the bill allows for a separation of the governance for upstream and midstream, downstream aside, for very simple reasons. The numbers in those industries are far, they're not, there's no basis for comparison. So if a downstream company makes an investment of $10 million, well, sorry, in fact, it's a material, significant investment. For the guys in upstream, that could very well be an expense line in a month. It's not material.
A pump. Yeah, that's a pump.
When you have a regulatory agency that is dealing with people with that level of disparity in terms of impact of numbers, you find that the regulatory agency typically cannot separate that when they're dealing with people. So in terms of requirements, in terms of payments for license, to operate, to supply as a vendor to a downstream company, you're paying essentially the same thing to supply the upstream company and to supply a downstream company, where the rewards are not necessarily the same.
They're not the same. So I see.
I think that separation is also important so that you can match regulation to the size of the industry. I also think for budget purposes, it makes no sense to pay the guy who is regulating the downstream and the guy who is regulating the upstream the same way, because they're two separate businesses. So in addition to the activities, which I think Mr. Victor elucidated, I think on the governance side, that separation is also critical to go forward.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I agree with you on this. Actually, we see that a lot with DPR. I mean, there are sometimes we're working on the upstream side and people are bringing a DPR guy who works on the downstream to come and work with us on the upstream. And we see that it's not the same business at all. So it's a very fair point that you've made there. All right. So, but then let me have a follow-up question in this. Like you already mentioned in your response there. So, Mr. Adeola, I'm going to come back to you on this one. You just mentioned there that they're separating it into two separate companies, okay, one company to manage the JVs, one company to manage the PLCs, the profit sharing companies. All right. But my question, though, is that my experience looking at what the other NOCs, the national oil companies, are doing around the world, they're not going this route. Do you understand? If you look at, rather, what they are doing, if you look at, say, Malaysia now or Indonesia, what they are doing is that they know that the oil reserves in those countries are going down. So to build their own local competencies, what they are doing is that they are buying the fields off the international oil companies. So Shell is leaving Malaysia or ExxonMobil is leaving Indonesia. The national oil company is buying those fields back from them and they are operating it. What that does for them is that it allows them to build local competencies and also to compete. I can also see that in places like Qatar, in Abu Dhabi and places like that. So my question is, why is it that we're not following that global trend? Why is it that we're not taking back some of those anchorages back from the IOCs and allowing NNPC to run it, rather than going this route where those companies are still running those acreages, and then we're just partners. We're a silent partner rather than being an active partner in the operation of these oil fields. Mr. Adeola, first to you, and then later to Mr. Victor.
Okay, I think the answer, that question answers itself. We're currently a country struggling to meet its cash obligations, even in the JVs, in the partnerships that currently exist. So I think it stands to reason that Nigeria will not be able to fund operating those fields at NNPC directly.
Okay, that's one.
Two, I also think that we probably have approached it in the best format for Nigeria by first starting with the concept of marginal fields and asking the IOCs to spin off fields that commercially they contribute very little to their bottom line, but will still be significant businesses for Nigerian operators.
Correct.
In the last couple of years, you've seen the marginal field play, and it has grown significantly. The ITOs of this world, the Aerotons, and so many other players have built capacity, built competence.
Seplat,
I think that, Seplat, probably the biggest player in that field, even the Niger Delta Development Corp. So NDC itself as a player in that part of the business, I think it's probably the best model for us in terms of developing skills, developing capacity. Yes, I agree that Nigerians work in the IOCs and all of that today, but in all honesty, a lot of the methodologies, a lot of the systems are still imported. So the marginal fields are the full Nigerian play, if you allow me to use that choice of words. And so we're finding our feet, we're developing ourselves, so that someday, if we do decide to go the route of full nationalization, Nigerians will be fully capable. But I'm not sure that is a step that even I would recommend today.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Mr. Victor, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I share the same opinion with Mr. Adeola. So in Nigeria, we're doing it a little bit differently because of the structural issues that we have. The NNPC today that is involved in the E&P business is essentially just NAPIMS, and it's essentially an investment company.
Correct.
Now, the NNPC has the NPDC, which is supposed to be an operator, but they are operating very small fields. They are not really into the business. Also, because of the structural issues, it has been a member of the NNPC group. So the way we're doing it is different. It's private entities taking over the so-called marginal fields. So we're doing it differently, not exactly as it's been done in other countries. In those other countries, their national oil company was more involved in the business, so that's why it's like this.
Okay, but Victor, my challenge though is that, and I hear you, and I think that you gentlemen are addressing it the right way. I understand that, but does that also not then explain why we have not developed a lot? Let me tell you why I'm saying this. Okay, so you look at a country like Norway now, for example. Norway discovered oil in the 70s, and they did not start operating anything themselves until the 80s. But they took a plunge, with Statoil, Equinor today, or Hydro, and they became a big player almost, and then they learned as they went. You understand? Whereas if you look at NNPC has been operating since 1977. Really, it's a bit embarrassing that even today, Nigeria, we don't have a real major player who is a global player from Nigeria for a country that has operated fields for in excess of 50 years. Our first oil field was in 1956. So for me, is it a technical issue, or is it the fact that we don't have the money to play? Why don't we have a global presence? Is it because we don't have the money to play, or we don't have the technical ability to play? What's your take on that?
I don't think it's the money or the technical ability. I think it's because of the structural issues in the way the NOC, which is the NNPC, is built.
Yeah.
We all know what happened in the downstream sector, where the NNPC was running refineries. They could not run the refineries, not because of lack of capacity, but structurally, the NNPC is not built to run that kind of business. So for example, there was one time I heard that the MD of the Port Harcourt refinery could only approve a PO of 5 million naira.
Correct. Yes.
One small electric motor is more than 5 million naira. So it has to go to Abuja to get approval. You cannot run a business like that. So that's why that competence and the skill level has not been able to grow in the NNPC. It's really a structural issue.
It is a structural issue. Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, then let me come to the next question though. So let me come to the next question. When I saw this bill, and I have to agree that there's a lot of good work which has been put into this bill. It's a lot of good work has been put into the bill. The only thing that worried me a bit was, are we at the risk of overregulation? Do you understand? And let me tell you why I think so. I'm worried about this. So the bill calls, for example, for the establishment of a trust, do you understand, of a trust for the host community. Today, we already have the NDDC, do you understand, which takes part of the profit of existing companies. Do you understand? Then now we're creating another one that says trust bill. We have the trust bill. Then we have NIMASA, who normally should not be involved with these guys, who is trying to put their own hands into how LLNG, for example, operates. Then we have the local content law, which has only come in about 2 or 3 years ago. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but all of a sudden you have 3, 4, 5, 6 different laws coming in at the same time. So for me, it looks like we have a risk of over-regulating these companies. What's your take on that? Mr. Adeola, you go first, please.
So Adeola, I'm trying to find the exact dates, but recently the House of Reps had like a public hearing on PIB.
Okay.
And if you followed that public hearing, you begin to understand why we are where we are. Because essentially everybody came in and asked for their share of the cake. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
Rather than take a holistic or a national perspective, everybody came in and so the host community will come in and say, instead of 5%, let it be 10%. These people will come in and say, the Pengasson and this one will come in and say, let it, and essentially everybody came up with ideas that further worsen the operating cost
conditions,
the operating cost of doing business in Nigeria. So that as in, if you do take all of that on, and you're right, today, if you do any business in the upstream, you will pay a local content levy. The businesses that are in there will pay something on education tax.
Correct.
Already, you have commitments to host communities that are not legislated, but you as a partner in those communities already handle. So whether it's their hospital, it's road development,
school,
schools or something, they're already engagements in that sense. But what I find, even with, so today, for instance, in Nigeria, we are essentially almost deregulated the downstream. Because nobody is having a conversation about why we still need a whole agency to do the petroleum pricing. Because in reality, that can be a desk in NNPC. All the guy does, he has a template. He takes the current price, international pricing for the product. Logistics is already built into the template. He puts in that number, and he can then say, oh, this is the kind of number we're looking at. But we've got a whole agency that continues to act like we're still regulating the price for petrol, regulating the price for kerosene, or the price for diesel. Because we see those agencies as means of employing people, from other perspective, as means of people making money. So when you find a NIMASA whose work was essentially to manage the maritime industry, starts making statements like offshore oil is also in the maritime space.
Oh, correct. Yeah.
It's not about NIMASA caring about that. It's that somebody in NIMASA thought and said to themselves, oil companies have money. Let's try and extract part of our own. The same thing with the host community bill. Why do you need a trust, which will essentially be managed by the same people who we say have a history of poor management of, I've had police trust. We know how single individuals, one after the other, have pillaged those police trust and left the police without anything. So we're looking at government with a history of a lack of credibility, forgive the choice of words, asking us again to create another trust to put money into. If I was a host community, I would be challenging that. But I'd rather deal with the oil companies directly and let them look after me. Don't create a middleman to collect the money again, and then the whole agency getting paid out of that money like you have for NDDC. Recently, there was a hearing about NDDC, and you're seeing how many people are spending billions clearing water hyacinth. We're going to have exactly the same stories happen with the host community trust. So you're right, there is overregulation, but it's because people are not being sincere. It's because people are trying to create a rent model to allow them extract also from the industry.
Wow, that is not good. I mean, because where we are today, this rent seeking, we should be avoiding. Mr. Victor, what's your take on this?
Yeah, in addition to what he just said, I think the other part that we're not looking at is the risk to the industry itself. All these additional regulations, the changes in the law, the fact that we've been talking about the PIB for several years and nothing has passed. Yeah. So many investors are, standing by, waiting to see what the final legislation would be before they make an investment decision. And all investments are going to other countries. With stable regulations. So for me, that's even the biggest risk, that we have. If you know that, okay, these are the rules, this is how you play in the industry, you make your analysis and see if it is a viable investment. But that uncertainty that we currently have has really slowed down the growth of the industry. And we're not really at the potential of where we should normally be.
Where we should be. Actually, Mr. Victor, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, for me, this is the next question I was going to ask you, gentlemen, actually. Because anyway, globally, the oil industry itself is under a lot of buffeting across the globe. Yeah, do you understand? And in fact, I think it was only last year that they were saying the biggest two in the US, Chevron and Exxon, talked potentially about merging. Do you understand? To show how much stress that they were already under. Now, with this new bill, you understand, we just talked about the regulation issue. I remember that in 2003-04, when I used to work in the oil upstream sector in Nigeria, I remember that at that time, the government take on every dollar of oil was between 90 and 94 cents, depending on how you split it. We mentioned 85% PPT. We mentioned the royalty, which was 20% at that time. With the new changes, that royalty goes from 20% to 42% for onshore. Yeah, the PPT, which used to be after taxes, do you understand? It was a profit. It was a tax on profit only. They have changed that now to a national hydrocarbon tax, and the national hydrocarbon tax does not allow those companies to deduct interest rate for any money that they bring in, which is the biggest part of their stuff. Do you understand? So somebody is going to build an Egina FPSO or is going to build a Train 7 for LNG in Nigeria, which is $10 billion. It's not small money. Now that money needs to be borrowed from a big bank in Japan or in the US, and those companies will pay interest. Government no longer allows them to deduct that before they charge interest on the profit. So if those fiscal changes are so significant, are we able to attract investors at all? This is my worry. I reiterate that question again. These companies are challenged globally, okay? Globally, everywhere in the world, they are challenged. And now we're putting a little more strain on them. Are we likely to be able to attract them at all? So Mr. Victor, you go first, and then you go to Mr. Adeola. Mr. Victor, so just continue from what you were saying earlier, please.
Yeah, well, with these changes in the legislation, it's very unlikely that we'll be able to attract, investment into the industry, especially when you look at what is happening in the deep water space. There are other opportunities, in other countries, even within Africa. Mozambique, is now very big opportunities there. So if the legislation makes it more or less attractive, the investment dollars would go somewhere else. It's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer.
So we really need to look at what we're doing and fully analyze what benefits we expect to get, from this new legislation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Adeola, any final words on that?
I mean, so of the 70 billion US dollars that was invested in Africa in the last 14, 18 months, only about $3 billion came to Nigeria, which is a very significant point, considering that in terms of ease of access to oil, Nigeria is probably number one. There are places in the Niger Delta where if you scratch with a hoe, you will see oil. The irony of that is that Nigeria is about, in terms of cost, is about 40% more expensive to produce in Nigeria than in places where it's more difficult to access the oil because of some of the things that we have mentioned already today. If you're doing business in Nigeria, you have to do your own private security. You have to create an IPP to support that business. And so the IOCs thought, okay, maybe we should start exiting land where we are easy to reach. Let's go deep offshore. The government has now changed fiscal policy for deep offshore. So, and what we don't seem to realize as a country is that between when investment decisions are made and when we actually see oil, we're looking sometimes a decade.
10 years easily, yes.
Yeah. So if no decisions are made today, it means that in the next 10 years, there's nothing on the horizon. Wow. That's the saddest part.
Wow.
We had Bonga Southwest at Paru at the final investment decision stage 3 different times, and now nobody's even talking about it anymore. So, and Victor is right. 10 years from now, most people are looking at banning, what's it called? Consuming vehicles. Yeah, they're looking to go electric. So in the next 10 years, where we don't even have new projects coming up, oil is losing its significance on a global scale. When we should be doing everything we can to maximize whatever oil or gas that we have today.
Exactly.
It's clearly the case of somebody who has an expiry product in his supermarket that is about to expire. The sensible thing is to put it close to the entrance and cut the price. Buy 2 and get 1 free. Buy for 10% of. But we're not seeing that picture.
No,
so we continue to listen to people like OPEC that tell us that crude demand will go up. It will double in the next 20 years. And you're wondering where did this number, Victor rightly said, we're no longer the only or the big game in Africa.
Yes.
You've got Senegal, you've got Mozambique, you've got almost everybody in the West African and South African belt today has oil.
Yeah.
We're no longer the beautiful bride that we used to be, and we're increasing our dowry. We are going to stay in Spinster
for a long time. Very good point, Mr. Adeola. Well, but it's not all bad news. I mean, you mentioned the Bonga Southwest is very good point. You know, it was one of the questions I was going to ask you guys, but I think you already covered that, so I'm just going to skip it because I thought Egina was a huge success for Nigeria. But what's happening with Zaba, Bonga Southwest, I think you already covered that point. So I'm just going to skip it. I come to the next point, which is the downstream, the Dangote refinery. For me, it's a huge thing of pride for Nigeria. You know, it's the single largest FCC train in the world. It's 650,000 barrels of oil. It's certainly one of the largest refineries in the world. What will this do for our downstream sector? Mr. Adeola, you are a downstream expert. What would the Dangote refinery do for us?
So the Dangote refinery is always exciting and interesting for me. It is interesting because when you see the guys who have expertise in operations management, you know, gurus, the shells of this world, they are exiting refinery business.
Yes,
saying it is not profitable.
Correct.
So like everything else, we seem to be entering of the refinery business, but our case is peculiar. We're a country with a lot of oil, with very little or no refining capacity, functional refining capacity.
Correct.
So everybody that can refine locally at least has a market to service in Nigeria. Even so, they're not Dangote. Good for in Nigeria in the sense that you have less congestion at ports. You spend. That's assuming that we can arrive at some local currency type payments with Dangote. So then you spend a lot less dollar on refined products, which is probably number one thing that puts pressure on our dollar position as a country. And he also positions him to do significant things in African space, because there's outside of, I think, Senegal, there's very little refining capacity. So it's business that I think will continue to have. So even when people stop using vehicles, carbon-powered fuel vehicles, I think Africa would still lag significantly on that curve. So there's business for people like Dangote. I think it's immense. I think it's fantastic that Nigeria has supported him to build that, and I hope that Dangote remembers finally goes operational.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Maximize the relationship. Let me put it that way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adeola. Mr. Victor, the Dangote refinery. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, it's a very bold move, on the part of Dangote, because he has done what other players in the industry, those that have experience in it, refuse to do. The risk by building a refinery in Nigeria, and a very big one at that.
Very big.
Very, very bold. My only hope is that the government policy would not affect, the business. We've been talking about deregulation for a very long time. Government still has its hand, in the price control regime, especially for oil and kerosene. So that's my biggest worry, to secure that investment. Like Adeola said, the market is there, in Nigeria. We use internal combustion engines for our transportation, power, and everything. So the market is there, but I just hope that the government policy would not adversely affect the investment that has been done there.
That's been done there. Okay, thank you very much. My last question for you, gentlemen, before I leave this segment, is on the LNG. I used to say to people, I said, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, Nigeria was the #1 LNG guy in the world. 20 years ago, yeah. Now I think we're number 5. Australia has gone past us. Qatar has gone past us. The US has gone past us. And Mr. Adeola mentioned something earlier, which is absolutely true. Between the final investment decision and when we see things actually done, maybe 10 years. I remember Nigeria Train 7, LNG Train 7. We did the FID for that project in 2006. All right, 2006, OK LNG, we did the FID in 2006. We're now in 2021, 15 years after, we don't have those things on the ground. So my question, though, is that, but if you look at the people who are doing this around the world, I mean, look at how much money the state of Qatar is making from LNG. Qatar has just put another $28 billion to increase their capacity from 77 metric ton to 110. The same if you are in the US. Australia has built about 6 or 7 LNG plants. Meanwhile, the 3 that Nigeria has been planning since 2006, we can't seem to start anything. Brazil LNG is on hold. OK LNG is on hold. Nigeria Train 7 has just been awarded this year by this government for the cost of 10 billion. So what can we do to recover this lost ground? We used to be #1. We're already down the pecking order to #5, and our case could get worse. Because like you said, if Mozambique LNG comes on board, which is already, they're making a lot of progress with the Mozambique projects, then we are going to be even in a worse situation than we are today. What can we do to recover our place of pride in the LNG market? Mr. Victor, you go first.
Okay, so for the LNG space, yes, we are lagging behind, but it's the same structural issues, that we have in Nigeria that has us in this situation. Now, gas in Nigeria is primarily found in the onshore fields.
Correct.
And today, most of the onshore fields, you don't have access anymore. Too many issues, security issues, so it is really difficult. So most of this stranded gas cannot even be accessed today to send to a potential LNG plant for export. The other thing too is all the gas in Nigeria effectively belongs to the state. So for an operator that wants to develop the gas business, there is no real incentive to make the investment. So I think 1,000 cubic feet of gas currently goes for like $1.50, but in other markets, you get maybe double or 3 times that amount. So there is no incentive to develop.
Wow.
Yeah, that's business.
Wow.
So that's the other problem.
You're right. I think you're right. I remember a few years ago, British Gas came to us, BG came to do the gas mapping for Nigeria, and they were staying on the sideline waiting for us to pass that bill. That bill didn't go through, so they moved their money to Brazil. And
these new developments you see happening in other countries like Mozambique, Australia, they are accessing gas resources that are in essentially one location.
One location.
Gas reserve, you develop it, you send it to the plant, liquefy and export. So it's not so complicated. Nigeria, you have the gas everywhere. The infrastructure to even move the gas from those locations to the plant doesn't even exist. You have to build pipelines. You have the right-of-way issues that are now even more complicated than it was before. It takes a very long time now to build pipelines.
Wow. Wow.
So it's difficult. Yeah.
What you're saying to me is basically what you're saying is that we need to build a gas gathering network first before we can even begin to talk about these projects.
It's part of it. But if it is not attractive to the operators of these fields, the investment will not come.
Will not come.
Remember, most of these onshore shallow water fields, they are all JV operated. So 60% NNPC. NNPC cannot fund.
They cannot fund it. Wow.
So it's all stranded resources.
Not good. Mr. Adeola, final word on the LNG projects. Is there any hope for us?
So yes, I mean, and I think Victor raised a very fantastic point in terms of infrastructure. One of the things that PIB looks to address in terms of separation of governance and the funds that are created by each of those ones. So the regulator for the upstream creates from the rents for acreages and all of that, 10% creates a fund. The regulator or the authority, as it will be called, for downstream, midstream, also creates a fund that is targeted towards gas infrastructure developments.
Correct.
So I agree with Victor. I think the government also sees that there's a need for a gas. In fact, if you sit with the guys in NNPC, there is a map that has been designed for gas gathering and the rest.
Exactly. BG did that for us about 8 years ago. BG did that job. I remember that.
So there's a design, and the PIB was meant to also address how to fund the infrastructure development. The PIB just didn't happen.
I see.
What you look at the LNG map across the world, guys who we typically have we had contracts with and sold to and continue to sell to. Between us and them now, there are so many new LNG projects that have sprung up, which makes buying LNG from Nigeria a lot more expensive in terms of transportation. And as you know, those large carriers are not
cheap.
Where they are going to buy from, the better for them. So Nigeria is at risk of having fantastic LNG that will become stranded, or you have to sell even cheaper to compensate for the cost of transportation for the guys who would come. Because so many new LNG projects have sprung up between us and our users.
And our market.
I think Train 7 would happen like all the others, because the guys who are sponsoring Train 7 are proven people.
Yes.
It's the same Shell and his partners, and they have seen the benefit of top Train 6. So Train 7 would happen, and that's why it's been awarded. People have started to contract and so Train 7 would happen. As I've often said to people, Nigeria's focus on gas, because of this several other people that have come up beside us, has to be an industrialization, a local industrialization play, not necessarily exports.
Domestic gas.
I personally think that in terms of our infrastructure development, it should be targeted at power, targeted at industries in terms of the piping networks, towards where we have power plants, towards where we have industries and the rest, rather than channeling it to some LNG location, because our LNG is about to become very uncommercial.
Uncommercial, I see.
In the nearest window. That's my own take.
Thank you very much. I think you've put it very succinctly. I mean, that's fantastic. Because the good thing, though, is that this new PIB law actually has a requirement for domestic gas. There's a special part of that PIB law, which Nigeria is now built into that law as well. So hopefully, we'll be able to take that. I want to thank you so much for your time today, gentlemen. I will take a few questions from the audience because I know that some of our participants might have questions for you, gentlemen. We will only have time to be able to address one or two questions before we go to the next session. Mr. Tosin, Mr. Ayo, are there any questions for our panelists?
Yes, we have some questions.
Please go ahead.
Okay, just like you said you want one or two questions. Okay, I want to take a question here. I think it also has to do with, I want to like, it's from, I want to take a particular question here from Joseph Akinola. Joseph Akinola is actually asking a question that I think it's basically addressed, but I think let's just throw more light on it. He said, in terms of looking at, if you compare with Ghana, Brazil, and Angola, looking at what the PIB has to like offer, how competitive will we be? You know, I know you're putting all this stuff as regards PIB and the rest. I'm paraphrasing his question anyway. I'm not just asking it. But if you look at all these things, how competitive will you be? Because if you do all this, you know, you still must be able to, like the same market, you are going to actually go to sell your product. So how competitive will Nigeria be compared to other players if you implement all this stuff you talked about in the PIB? Thank you very much. That is from Larry.
Okay. Mr. Victor, can you address that, please? Briefly.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult for me because I don't know the specifics of the Brazilian or the Angolan market, but a few things I know. First, local content. Brazil has even more stringent local content laws than Nigeria.
Correct.
Angola also has local content laws that are similar to us. So, you know, as an investor, you look at a whole lot of things before you choose where you make your investment. You look at your existing facilities, the investments that you already have. If you can tie back, you know, some new developments to existing infrastructure, it becomes commercially more viable. So there are many things the investor looks at. It's not just, and also an investor also looks at spreading his risk. You don't want to put all your investment in one country. So even if maybe Nigeria is not attractive, because you don't want to put all your investment in Angola, you may also consider investing in Nigeria. But this new PIB, for me, the biggest thing is the uncertainty. You know, the National Assembly has said that by April, they are going to pass this new PIB. We've heard that several times before.
Okay.
Is it actually going to happen? Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
So is that uncertainty that is our biggest problem?
That is the biggest problem. Thank you very much. Please, the second question, there's a question from Mr. Laolu Adeye, and Mr. Laolu, it's good to have you on the call as well. Thank you for joining us today. Mr. Adeola, the question from Mr. Laolu is this, that the whole world is going into electric cars, AI, driverless cars. Why is there still so much focus on oil and gas for us? Can you address that question for us, Mr. Adeola?
Well, so I think everybody starts from where they are. And where we are is still at the basics. We still can't generate power. So if you're going to talk about AI, talk about electric cars, you need power to support those things. Otherwise, you'd have a lot of cars stranded in the middle of the
stranded
road.
on the roads. Okay.
You'd have electric trains that would just stop in the middle of nowhere. So I think we're still grappling with fundamentals, and until you have the fundamentals in place, you can't begin. In all honesty, I think taking the leap to those other things are a lot easier, because after that it's copy and paste once you have the fundamentals in place. We've got to get our ass together and sort the fundamentals. And like I said, I disagree largely with the OPEC position in terms of the importance of oil in the next 20 years. OPEC still insists that oil will be big. In fact, will get bigger when you see their trends upwards for more demands because population will grow and the rest. But in reality, I honestly agree with the question. I think oil will have less relevance. It won't lose it completely, because I think for industries, it will still be a lot more viable to power with fossil fuel, and it will be to power with cleaner sources of energy. But for cars and the rest, I also think that Africa will be behind that curve. We will not adopt it as quickly as other places.
Another 30 years. Easily.
I mean, it cost me what now? Almost 80 naira per kilowatt hour in my house. So people can just even put on ACs arbitrarily, not talk of now plugging a car to charge with that same power. So our realities are different. So we will stick with what we have for a while longer than everybody else, but ultimately we'll get there too. That's my thinking.
Thank you very much. Just one final question from Mr. Fisayo. Victor, I was wondering if you could help us answer this question. The question from Mr. Fisayo is that the PIB stipulates that the termination of any outstanding arbitration or court cases, any ongoing cases, they must be terminated before the PIB takes on. Now, do you think that that's going to impact on the industry players? I.e., if somebody says, I have a justified reason to take you to court, but you're saying, no, I need to terminate all that case before I sign the next contracts or the next set of agreements with you. Does that have a big impact on us? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a very, very big deterrent. And I think the IOCs, they have this trade association called the OPTS. It's one of the strong things that they are really fighting against, because it's a totally wrong approach. It's a totally wrong approach.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Victor. I understand what you're saying. All right, so gentlemen and ladies, thank you so much for joining us for this particular session. This is the end of this session for today for the PIB. We have 2 additional papers which we are going to present after the break. I will hand it back to Mr. Ayo, who's our moderator for today. And thank you again to our panelists, Mr. Victor, Mr. Adeola. It's a great pleasure to have you again on this discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Mr. Ayo, thank you. I hand it back to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, our panelists. It was a pleasure having every one of you on board, and thank you very much, Kunle, for actually anchoring that session. Well, we have actually spent quite a bit of time, and then we actually eaten to a break. I want to plead with us that for the sake of time, so that we can actually wrap this thing up as soon as is built in the agenda. I would like us to go straight up into the session right now, please. I would like us to go straight up to the session so that we don't take too much of your time. That is why we're pleading for this. We're going to be going to a session of the presentation on the Nigerian transportation sector. We're going to be taking that session right now. And we're going to be taking that session right now. And Mr. Muyiwa Odunlade is going to be taking the session. Mr. Muyiwa Odunlade is going to be taking the session right now. So Muyiwa, are you ready?
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Okay, so go ahead, Muyiwa, over to you.
All right, good morning, everybody. Always a pleasure to be part of Kunle's drive to see a better Nigeria in his lifetime. That's what I put it as. Coming after Victor and Kunle, I got carried away listening to some of the perspectives they shared. They're always interesting. It's always interesting listen to them. So I'll just go straight without wasting much time. I have a package prepared. Mine is not it's not like the panel situation. So I'm going to just run through some basics that we need to be aware of when we say the Nigerian transport sector. It's a big topic. It's a very wide topic to address in 10-15 minutes, but I'll try my best. I've tried to compress some of the salient points into the session. So let me go. Are you presenting the slide, or I should?